The iron beast screamed its arrival through the Wyoming blizzard. Black smoke mixing with white fury as the locomotive ground to a halt at Silver Vale Station. Ice crystals danced in the amber glow of the platform lanterns, and the wind howled like a pack of wolves circling prey. Lillian Hart clutched her son's mittened hand tighter as the train's door clanged open. 7-year-old Thomas looked up at her with eyes too old for his years, snowflakes catching on his dark lashes. "Is he here, Mama?" "We'll see, sweetheart." Her voice barely carried over the storm's rage. She'd practiced those words 100 times on the journey from Chicago, but now they tasted like ash in her mouth. The platform stretched before them like a stage, and Silver Vale's residents had assembled for the show. Mail-order brides were better entertainment than anything the traveling medicine shows could offer. Women in wool cloaks huddled together like hens, their whispers sharp as icicles. Men stood with arms crossed, appraising her like livestock at auction. Lillian pulled her traveling cloak tighter, ensuring the high collar covered her neck completely, beneath layers of fabric. The scars on her shoulder and chest seemed to burn with remembered heat. She'd chosen this dress specifically for its coverage. No proper woman showed skin anyway. But for her, modesty meant survival. Look at her, dragging that poor child into Lord knows what arrangement. The voice belonged to a severe-looking woman in black bombazine, her face pinched like she'd been sucking lemons. This must be Ruthie McCoy, the minister's wife Jedediah had mentioned in his letters, the woman who kept the moral compass of Silver Vale pointing true north. A younger woman beside her added, "Mr. McGraw must be desperate indeed. First wife dead these 3 years, and now this." Lillian kept her chin high, though her knees trembled beneath her skirts. She'd survived worse than gossip. She'd survived Josiah Hart's fists and his friends' cruelty. She'd survived the fire that took their farmhouse and finally freed her from that hell. Whispers couldn't kill her.
"But they could hurt Thomas?"
The boy pressed closer to her side as a group of local children pointed and giggled. One boy, bigger than the rest with mean pig eyes, called out, "Hey, catalog boy, your mama buy you a new papa from the newspaper." "Hush now, Samuel," his mother said, but without conviction. The damage was done. Thomas's shoulders hunched like a turtle retreating into its shell. Through the swirling snow, a figure emerged from the white void, tall as a pine and broad as a barn door. Jedediah McGraw moved with the steady confidence of a man who'd faced down stampedes and lived to tell about it. His duster coat billowed behind him, and his wide-brimmed hat sat low against the wind. Lillian's breath caught. His letters had been sparse on personal details, just facts about his ranch, his needs for a wife who could work hard and raise children. He'd sent no photograph, claiming he wasn't much for such vanities. Now she understood why. Jedediah McGraw didn't need a photograph. His presence spoke louder than any image could. His face was carved from granite and weather, with deep lines around green eyes that had seen too much. A scar ran through his left eyebrow, and his jaw hadn't met a razor in at least 3 days. He wasn't handsome in the way of gentleman callers or catalog models. He was handsome in the way mountains were rough, enduring, honest. The crowd fell silent as he approached, their entertainment suddenly feeling too real. This wasn't a story from a dime novel. This was a man taking a stranger as his wife, a woman taking her child into an unknown home. Jedediah stopped 3 feet from them, and Lillian held her breath. His gaze moved from her to Thomas, lingering on the boy's scared face. Her heart plummeted. She'd been foolish to hope. What man wanted another man's child underfoot? She'd mentioned Thomas in her letters, of course, but mentioning and seeing were different beasts entirely. Then Jedediah McGraw did something that stopped every wagging tongue in Silver Vale. He pulled off his hat, letting the snow dust his dark hair silver, and dropped to one knee in the slush. Eye to eye with Thomas, he extended one massive, work-worn hand. "You must be Thomas," he said, his voice like distant thunder. "I'm Jed.
I hear you're 7 years old.
Thomas nodded, mute with surprise. 7's a good age for learning ranch work. Can you ride a horse? No, sir. Well then, we'll have to fix that. A man needs a good horse out here. Jed's eyes crinkled at the corners, not quite a smile, but close. What do you say? Thomas want to learn? The boy looked up at his mother, then back at the giant man kneeling in the snow. Yes, sir, I'd like that. Jed nodded solemnly, as if they'd just sealed a business deal. Then he rose to his full height and finally looked at Lillian. The wind chose that moment to die down, creating a pocket of stillness in the storm. Mrs. Hart, he said, touching his hat brim.
You look tired.
Long journey.
Yes,
her voice came out steadier than she felt.
But we're here now.
That you are. He studied her face with those green eyes that seemed to see straight through her careful facades. I meant what I wrote. I need a wife who can work hard, who knows that life out here ain't easy. But, he paused, glancing down at Thomas, then back to her. I need this too. A family, not just a housekeeper. The crowd stirred restlessly. Ruthie McCoy's mouth opened like she had plenty to say about this arrangement, but her husband's hand on her arm stopped her. I have a wagon, Jed continued, seemingly oblivious to their audience. It's a 2-hour ride to the ranch, but I've got buffalo robes and hot stones from the boarding house stove. You'll be warm enough. He reached for their single trunk, lifting it like it weighed nothing. Thomas's eyes went wide with awe. Lillian remembered Josiah had complained bitterly about that trunk's weight, cursing her for packing books alongside their clothes. This all? Jed asked. We travel light, Lillian said. Something flickered in his eyes, understanding, perhaps. A man didn't ask a mail-order bride about her past unless he wanted to share his own, and she sensed Jedediah McGraw carried his own heavy loads. Mr. McGraw. Ruthie McCoy finally found her voice, stepping forward with the righteous authority of a minister's wife. Surely you'll want to... That is, the Reverend would be happy to counsel you both before any hasty decisions. Jed turned his steady gaze on her, and Ruthie actually took a step back. Mrs. McCoy, he said with careful politeness, I appreciate the offer. We'll be at church come Sunday, same as always. The dismissal was clear. Ruthie's face flushed red as her husband gently tugged her away. As they walked toward the wagon, Thomas between them. Lillian heard the whispers resume like buzzing flies, but one voice carried clearer than the rest, a man near the station door saying, McGraw's either the smartest man in Silver Vale or the biggest fool. Time will tell which. The wagon was exactly what she'd expected, sturdy, practical, built to last. Jed helped them up with surprising gentleness, his massive hands careful around her waist, then lifting Thomas like he was made of spun glass, true to his word. Thick buffalo robes waited on the bench, and wrapped stones radiated heat at their feet. As Jed checked the horses' harnesses, a thin, haunting sound drifted across the valley wolves howling in the distance. Thomas shivered, and Lillian pulled him closer. They're far off, Jed said, climbing up beside them. They know better than to come near the ranch. Still, good to remember we're in wild country now. Wild country. Yes, Lillian thought as the wagon lurched into motion, leaving Silver Vale's judgment behind. But she'd learned that civilization could be wilder than any frontier, at least with wolves. You knew where you stood. The storm swallowed them whole as they headed into the white unknown. Behind them, Silver Vale's lights flickered and died in the blizzard. Ahead lay 2 hours of freezing trail. Then a strange house with a strange man who'd just claimed her son with more kindness than the boy's own father ever had. Lillian touched the high collar of her dress, feeling the ridge of scar tissue beneath. She'd hidden her marks well, but secrets had a way of surfacing. When Jed learned what she concealed, the evidence of violence, the proof of her shameful past, would his green eyes still hold that steady kindness? Thomas dozed against her shoulder, trusting as only children could. The wrapped stones cooled at their feet, but Jed had thought to bring extras, switching them out with practiced efficiency. A man who planned ahead, who thought of comfort in small things. "Storm's getting worse," Jed said after an hour of silence. "But we'll make it. Always do. You've done this before, this journey in a blizzard." "Different cargo," he said simply, and she knew better than to ask what or who he meant. The wolves howled again, closer now, but still just voices in the wind. Somewhere in that swirling white chaos lay her new life, a ranch house she'd never seen, a role she'd have to learn, a man she'd promised to wed but didn't truly know. But as Thomas shifted in his sleep, murmuring something about horses, and Jed hummed tunelessly to calm the team, Lillian felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the faintest flutter of hope. It was fragile as a snowflake and just as likely to melt. But it was there. Perhaps the wolves weren't the real omen tonight. Perhaps the true sign was a rough cowboy kneeling in the snow to shake a small boy's hand, seeing not a burden, but a blessing. The wagon rolled on through the storm, carrying its cargo of secrets and dreams toward whatever dawn awaited in Silver Vale. The ranch emerged from the storm like a ship from fog, solid, weathered, real. Lillian's first impression was of strength, massive log walls chinked tight against the wind, a stone chimney breathing smoke into the gray dawn. Barns and outbuildings huddled like faithful dogs around their master. This wasn't just a house. It was a fortress against the wilderness. "Home," Jed said simply, guiding the exhausted horses toward the barn. Thomas stirred awake, blinking at the sight. "It's bigger than our old place," he whispered to his mother. "Everything's bigger out here," Jed said, having caught the boy's words despite the wind. "Wait till you see the sky when this storm clears." A figure emerged from the barn, a wiry man with graying whiskers and a pronounced limp. He grabbed the horses' bridles without being asked, nodding to Jed. "About time. Was starting to think you decided to winter in town." "Lillian, Thomas, this is Lucas. He helps run the place." Jed climbed down and reached up for them. "Lucas, Mrs. Hart and her son." Lucas touched his hat brim. "Ma'am, young sir." His eyes were kind despite their wariness. "I'll get these beasts settled. You folks get inside before you freeze solid." The house's interior was a revelation. Lillian had expected bachelor squalor, dirty dishes, dust, the smell of neglect. Instead, she found order. Not the fussy cleanliness of a woman's touch, but the practical organization of a man who valued function. Cast iron pots hung in order of size, firewood stacked neat as soldiers, a rifle above the mantel, oiled and ready. But it was the details that caught her heart. A rocking chair by the fire, small but well made, a shelf of books, spines worn from reading, a child's slate on the kitchen table, as if waiting for lessons that never came. Jed noticed her looking. The chair was, "It's yours now, if you want it." Sarah's chair, Lillian understood. The first Mrs. McGraw, who'd left behind these small ghosts of domestic life. She nodded carefully. "It's lovely. Your room's upstairs. Thomas can have the small room next to it, or—" Jed paused, uncertain. "There's a trundle bed in there, too, if he'd rather not sleep alone just yet." "Thank you." The thoughtfulness squeezed her chest tight. Josiah would have locked Thomas in the root cellar for showing fear. They settled in slowly over the following days, like silt finding its level in still water. Jed kept his distance, polite, helpful but never presuming. He showed Thomas around the ranch with patience that seemed infinite, explaining the work of each season, the personality of each horse, the names of the peaks that ringed their valley. "That one's Devil's Tooth," he told the boy, pointing at a jagged summit. "And that's Sleeping Woman. You see her profile?" Thomas squinted. "Oh, yes, she's lying on her back." Local tribes say she's waiting for her warrior to come home from battle. Jed's voice carried something heavy. Been waiting a long time. Lillian watched from the kitchen window as they worked together. Jed teaching Thomas to scatter grain for the chickens, to check for eggs without spooking the hens. The boy bloomed under the attention like a flower finding sun, but she remained coiled tight as a spring, waiting for the mask to drop, for the real Jed McGraw to show himself. Sunday came too quickly. Church is important here, Jed said over breakfast. Shows we're part of the community, but if you're not ready, we'll go, Lillian interrupted. Face them now or face them later. Later wouldn't be easier. She dressed with shaking hands, choosing her highest collar, her most modest dress. The bruises were long faded, but the scars, she pinned her hair severely, allowing no loose tendrils that might shift and reveal the burn marks creeping up her neck. The church sat at Silvervale's heart, white-painted pride against the mountains. Families arrived in wagons and on horseback, everyone in their best clothes, children scrubbed pink. Conversation died as Jed's wagon approached. Steady, he murmured, though Lillian wasn't sure if he meant the horses or her. They entered together, Thomas between them like a small shield. Every eye tracked their progress to a pew near the middle, not so far forward as to seem presumptuous, not so far back as to seem ashamed. Jed had calculated perfectly. Reverend McCoy was a thin man with kind eyes, nothing like his sharp-edged wife. His sermon dealt with Ruth and Naomi, about choosing new families and new lands. Lillian wondered if he'd selected it for their benefit, or if God just had peculiar timing. But it was after service that the real trial began. The social hour happened in the churchyard, where trestle tables groaned under the weight of pies and preserves. Women clustered like busy sparrows, while men discussed cattle prices and weather signs. Children ran wild between the graves, freed from sermon sitting. Mrs. Hart. Ruthie McCoy materialized at Lillian's elbow, flanked by two other women. We simply must welcome you properly to Silvervale. This is Mrs. Garrett and Mrs. Holbrook. We're the church's benevolent society. How kind, Lillian managed. Tell us. Mrs. Garrett leaned in with false sweetness. How did you and Mr. McGraw begin corresponding such a romantic story? I'm sure. Through the matrimonial news, Lillian said simply. She'd learned long ago that truth, carefully portioned, served better than lies. Oh, Mrs. Holbrook's nose wrinkled. How modern. And you brought your son. Ruthie's eyes glittered. From your late husband. We assume. Yes. Such a tragedy. Losing a husband so young. What took him? If you don't mind. Fire, Lillian thought. Fire and justice and the mercy of a fallen beam. An accident, she said aloud. On our farm. Where was this farm? Illinois. And your people, surely they miss you. I have no people. Truth again, sharp as glass. Her parents had disowned her when she married Josiah against their wishes. Pride had kept her from crawling back even when the bruises bloomed. None at all, Mrs. Garrett pressed. How unfortunate. A woman needs family to guide. She has family now. Jed's voice cut through their interrogation like an axe through kindling. He stood behind Lillian, not touching but close enough that she felt his warmth. Thomas was with him, clutching a cookie and looking anxious. Mr. McGraw, Ruthie recovered first. We were just getting acquainted with with Mrs. Hart. Good. His tone suggested otherwise. Thomas and I were thinking of showing his mother the creek. Fine spot for a picnic when the weather warms. It was a dismissal wrapped in courtesy. The women had no choice but to flutter away, but their whispers followed like smoke. They escaped soon after, but not before Lillian overheard Mrs. Holbrook say, "Mark my words, that woman's hiding something. You can see it in how she holds herself. all locked up tight.
If only they knew.
Lillian thought bitterly. The next days brought a rhythm. Morning chores, afternoon lessons for Thomas. Jed had been right about the slate waiting for use. Evening meals where conversation came easier. Jed never pried, never demanded, but he watched her with those steady green eyes, and she knew he was solving her like a puzzle, piece by careful piece. The test came on washing day. Lillian had heated water, prepared the tubs, gathered the clothes. Such a simple task, one she'd done 1,000 times. But as she reached for Jed's work shirt, her sleeve caught and tore on a nail protruding from the washboard. The fabric ripped from wrist to elbow, exposing her arm, exposing the scars. She froze. The burn marks traced up her forearm like a map of hell, pink and puckered and undeniable. Footsteps approached Jed, coming for something forgotten. There was no time to hide, no way to cover what the torn sleeve revealed. He stopped in the doorway. She waited for the disgust, the questions, the revulsion, damaged goods. That's what Josiah's friends had called her after the fire, when they'd seen what their sport had cost. Instead, Jed crossed to the shelf where he kept salves and medicines. He selected a tin, opened it to reveal thick white cream that smelled of honey and herbs. "This helps," he said quietly, setting it beside her. "With old burns, keeps them from pulling tight when the weather changes." She stared at him, words dust in her throat. "Sarah had a burn on her hand," he continued, not meeting her eyes. "Grabbed a hot pan wrong when we were first married. This helped her." He left without demanding explanation, without staring at her scars like they were entertainment. The tin remained, modest as a prayer. That night, Thomas fell asleep listening to Jed read from Ivanhoe, the boy's new favorite. Lillian sat in Sarah's rocking chair, her chair now mending her torn sleeve with tiny, careful stitches. The salve had helped. Her scars didn't pull so tight.
"He asks about his father sometimes,"
she said suddenly. Jed looked up from banking the fire. "What do you tell him?"
"That he's gone."
"That we're starting fresh." She hesitated.
"He wasn't a good man." "I figured as much."
"How?" Jed was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Good men don't leave marks that last." The words hung between them like a bridge, narrow, uncertain, but spanning something vast. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Not a storm this time, just winter's regular breathing. Tomorrow would bring church again. More whispers, more tests, misses. McCoy would find new ways to peck at her defenses. The town would watch and judge and wait for scandal. But tonight, in this lamp-lit room that smelled of wood smoke and leather, safety wrapped around her like a quilt. Thomas slept peaceful. Jed read quietly. The rocking chair created its ancient rhythm. She was starting to understand that Jedediah McGraw's silences weren't empty. They were full of things too big for words: grief and grace and the terrible wisdom of survival. He'd given her salve for her body's scars without demanding to know their origin. Perhaps, given time, he'd offer the same for the wounds that didn't show. The chair rocked, the fire whispered, and Lillian Hart began, terrifyingly, to hope. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under the door sometime during the night like a snake finding a crack in the wall. Lillian found it while sweeping, the cheap paper stark against the worn floorboards. No signature, no postmark, just words in cramped handwriting that made her blood turn to ice. Some fires never truly die. Some debts must be paid. He's looking for you. She sank into a chair, the paper trembling in her hands. The morning sounds of the ranch, Lucas calling to the horses, Thomas chattering about gathering eggs, faded to a distant hum. She knew that handwriting. Elias Doyle, one of Josiah's drinking companions, one of the men who'd thought a young wife was community property when her husband passed out from whiskey. "Mail come early." Jed's voice made her jump. He stood in the doorway, coffee cup in hand, that steady gaze taking in her white face, her shaking hands. "It's nothing." The lie tasted sour. She crumpled the paper, shoving it into her apron pocket. "Just Sometimes people leave advertisements. He didn't push, but she felt his eyes on her throughout breakfast. Throughout the morning chores, the letter burned in her pocket like a coal. That afternoon, she made an excuse to go to town for supplies. Jed offered to accompany her, but she insisted she needed to learn the route herself. His frown said he didn't believe her reasoning, but he helped her hitch the wagon without argument. Silver Vale's general store smelled of pickle brine and leather, coffee and coal oil. Mr. Garrett, husband to one of Ruthie's disciples, manned the counter with the suspicious air of a prison guard. "Mrs. McGrath," he said, using the name she hadn't claimed yet. "What can I do for you?" She handed over her list, trying to appear calm while her mind raced. Who had left the letter? How had they found her? And most terrifying, was Caleb Roan really free? "Heard there was some trouble down in Colorado." "Mr. Garrett said conversationally as he measured flour. "Prison break from Canyon City. Several men escaped." Lillian's hands clenched in her skirts. "How frightening." "Indeed. They say one of them was that Roan fellow you know, the one who burned down half of Cripple Creek few years back. Mean as a rattlesnake and twice as dangerous." He glanced at her sideways. "Course, you wouldn't know about such things, being from Illinois and all." She forced herself to breathe normally. "No, we lived very quietly." Funny thing, though. Mrs. Garrett emerged from the back room like a spider from its web. "My cousin lives in Springfield. I wrote her about our new addition to the community. You know how women enjoy such news. She says she never heard of any Hart family farming thereabouts." "Illinois is a large state," Lillian managed. True. Still, she knows most everyone in those parts. Been there 40 years. "Mrs. Garrett's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Perhaps you lived very far from Springfield." "Yes, quite far." She escaped with her purchases, but not before catching the meaningful look the Garretts exchanged. By evening, she knew. Half the town would hear about her suspicious origins. The ride home seemed longer, shadows stretching like accusatory fingers across the snow. Every crack of branch made her flinch. Caleb Roan, free, looking for her. She'd thought him safely locked away, serving 20 years for arson and assault. She'd testified at his trial, voice shaking as she described how he and Josiah's other friends had terrorized her, how the fire had started during one of their visits, while Josiah lay unconscious from drink, how she'd barely escaped with Thomas while the men fled, leaving Josiah to die in the flames. Caleb had sworn revenge from the defendant's chair. "You'll pay for this. Lillian Hart, you and the boy both. I got nothing but time to plan it." Apparently, time had run out sooner than expected. When she reached the ranch, Thomas ran to help unhitch the horses, chattering about the nest he'd found in the barn rafters. His innocent joy was a knife to her heart. How could she protect him from a ghost he didn't even remember? That evening, Jed finally spoke what had been building all day. "You want to tell me what's got you spooked?" They sat by the fire, Thomas already abed. She'd been pretending to mend a shirt, but her stitches were crooked as her thoughts. "I don't know what you mean." "Lillian." Just her name, but weighted with patience, and something else hurt. Maybe that she didn't trust him. "I'm not blind. That was no advertisement this morning. And the Garretts aren't subtle enough to keep their suspicions quiet. Mrs. Garrett made sure I heard all about your mysterious origins when I stopped for tobacco." "Are you asking me to leave?" The words came out small, defeated. "No." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "I'm asking you to let me help. Whatever you're running from, you don't have to face it alone. That's what this is. Isn't it this marriage we're supposed to face things together?" She wanted to tell him. The words pressed against her teeth like caged birds. But how could she explain the horror of those years, the bruises hidden under long sleeves? The way Josiah's friends had looked at her like she was a toy for their amusement, the fire that had been accident and escape all at once. "There was a man," she said finally. "One of my husband's associates. He
Blamed me for something, made threats. I heard he might be free again.
Jed absorbed this, his face unreadable in the firelight.
This man have a name.
Caleb Roan. Something shifted in Jed's expression. Roan. I've heard that name. Lucas mentioned it. His brother's a sheriff 2 counties over. Mean piece of work, from what I gather.
Yes.
And you think he's coming here? I don't know. Maybe. The letter didn't say exactly. Show me. She retrieved the crumpled paper from her pocket, watching as he read it once, twice, 3 times. His jaw tightened with each pass. Who's Elias Doyle? She startled.
How did you?
Writing's got character. This hand matches a letter that came for Lucas last month, asking about work. Signed Elias Doyle. Lucas didn't like the feel of it. Turned him down. Jed's eyes were green fire. Friend of your husband's?
Yes.
The kind of friend who'd help Roan find you. She nodded miserably. Jed stood abruptly, pacing to the window. For a long moment, he stared out at the darkness. When he turned back, she expected anger, demands that she leave before bringing trouble to his door. Instead, he said, I lost Sarah and Emma to scarlet fever. Came on sudden one day, they were laughing. Next day, burning up. 3 days after that, I was digging 2 graves in the frozen ground. Lillian's breath caught. Emma, the child whose slate waited for lessons, whose absence haunted this house like morning mist. For a year after, I wished I'd died too. Thought about making it happen more than once. Only thing stopped me was Lucas needing the work and the animals needing care. Can't leave good horses to starve because your heart's broken. He returned to his chair, leaning toward her with an intensity that made her want to run and stay in equal measure.
I know what it's like to carry ghosts. Lillian? Know what it's like to wake up expecting to see someone who ain't there anymore? But I also know that hiding from the past just makes it stronger. Secrets are like wounds, they fester in the dark. You don't understand, she whispered. The things that happened.
Were they your fault?
I married him. I stayed too long. That's not what I asked.
His voice was gentle but firm. Did you cause the bad things? No, but then the shame ain't yours to carry. She broke then, silent tears sliding down her face. Jed didn't move to comfort her, understanding somehow that touch would shatter her completely. He simply sat, solid as a mountain, while she wept for the girl who'd married at 17, full of hope and dreams of babies and Sunday dinners. The girl who'd learned too late that some men wore kindness like a mask, discarding it once the wedding vows were spoken. When the tears finally stopped, she found her voice.
If Caleb comes here, he won't just want me. He'll hurt Thomas to punish me. He'll hurt you for sheltering us. I should leave.
No. The word was granite, immovable. Jed, you don't know what he's capable of. I know what I'm capable of. He stood, checking the rifle above the mantel with practiced movements. This is your home now. Thomas's home. Any man wants to change that. He'll have to come through me. He paused, meeting her eyes. And Lucas, and probably half the hands from neighboring spreads. Once they hear, we take care of our own out here. Our own? The words wrapped around her like armor. That night, she showed him the scars properly for the first time. Not all of them, some wounds were too deep for sharing yet, but enough. The burns on her shoulder and chest from the falling timber. The thin lines on her arms from broken glass. Each mark a chapter in a story she'd never wanted written. Jed listened without flinching, without pity. When she finished, he rolled up his own sleeve, revealing a puckered bullet scar on his forearm. Cattle rustler, 5 years back. Lucas saved my life that day. He rolled the sleeve down. We all got our marks. Lillian, don't make us weak. Makes us survivors. Later, as she prepared for bed, she heard him talking low to Lucas by the barn, caught words like watch and rifle and send word to Sheriff Daniels. By morning, she knew.
the ranch would be ready for whatever came. The letter had meant to terrorize her, to send her running like a rabbit before hounds. But its author had miscalculated. She wasn't alone anymore. She had a man who faced down rustlers and storms with equal calm. She had a home with thick walls and good sight lines. She had a community that, despite its gossip and suspicion, protected its own. Let Caleb Roan come. He'd find Lillian Hart much changed from the terrified girl he'd known. The West had a way of forging steel from softer metals, and she was learning she had more strength than she'd imagined. But as she drifted toward sleep, she couldn't shake the image of Thomas's trusting face, or the cold certainty that Caleb Roan never forgot a debt real or imagined. The real storm was coming. Tonight's letter was just the first cold wind. The blizzard struck without mercy, as if the mountains themselves had declared war on anything that dared to breathe. One moment, the afternoon sky hung gray but calm. The next, a wall of white fury crashed down from the peaks like an avalanche made of wind and ice. Jed had seen it coming in the way the horses bunched together, the way the birds went silent. He'd driven the cattle into the near pasture and secured the barn doors. But even his weather eye hadn't predicted this savagery. "Where's Thomas?" Lillian's voice cut through the wind as she struggled from the house, shawl whipping like a flag. "Thought he was with you," Jed had to shout to be heard over the storm's roar. Her face went white as the snow. "He said he was checking on the chickens." They both turned toward the coop, a good 50 yards from the house, in clear weather, an easy walk. Now, it might as well have been on the moon. The snow fell so thick they couldn't see 10 feet. "Stay here," Jed commanded, but Lillian was already plunging into the white wall. He caught her arm. "No, you'll get lost. I'll find him." "He's my son. And you're no good to him frozen." He gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Trust me. Get inside. Heat water. Prepare blankets. I'll bring him back." For a heartbeat, she resisted, then nodded, every line of her body screaming reluctance as she retreated to the house. Jed tied one end of a rope to the porch post, the other around his waist. Old ranch trick many a man had died 10 feet from his own door in a whiteout. He plunged into the storm, following the fence line toward the coop. "Thomas, Thomas." The wind ate his words. Ice crystals stabbed at his exposed skin like needles. His boots broke through the fresh crust with each step, snow already knee-deep and rising. The chicken coop materialized like a ghost ship. Door banging open, the boy had made it this far, but inside, only frightened hens huddled on their roosts. Thomas. A sound, maybe, hard to tell over the wind's howl. Jed circled the coop, nearly tripping over something dark in the snow. His heart seized before realizing it was just a feed bucket, but their small footprints, already half-filled, leading toward the old equipment shed. Of course, the boy would have sought shelter when the storm hit. Smart lad, but that shed was drafty as a sieve, in this cold. Jed fought through drifts that grabbed at his legs like quicksand. The rope played out behind him, his lifeline growing thinner. The shed door was barred from inside, good boy, just like he taught him. Jed pounded with frozen fists. "Thomas, it's Jed, open up. Son." Scraping sounds. The bar lifted. A small face peered out, blue with cold but conscious. "Thank God." "I'm sorry," Thomas stammered through chattering teeth. "The set storm came so fast." "You did right," Jed said, scooping the boy up. "Now hold tight to my neck and keep your face down." The journey back stretched like a nightmare. The rope guided them, but each step was war. Thomas's weight, slight as it was, threw off Jed's balance. Twice he went to his knees, shielding the boy with his body. The cold ate through his coat, his gloves, his boots. His old wound, a poorly healed break in his left leg from a horse accident, screamed with each step. By the time they crashed through the kitchen door, Jed couldn't feel his face. Lillian was there instantly, peeling Thomas from his arms.
stripping the boy's frozen clothes with efficient desperation. Bath. Jed managed through numb lips. Warm, not hot. She'd already prepared it. As she bundled Thomas toward the tub, Jed collapsed in a chair, trying to work feeling back into his fingers. His ears rang. His chest burned with each breath. "Mama, is Mr. Jed okay?" Thomas's voice drifted from the other room, thin but steady. "I'm fine, boy," Jed called back, though his voice came out rough as sandpaper. "You just get warm." But as the evening wore on, fine became a lie. The cough started around supper just a tickle at first. By full dark, it was a bark that bent him double. His head pounded. His skin felt like it couldn't decide between burning and freezing. "You're fevering," Lillian said, laying a cool hand on his forehead. "Bed, now." Animals need... The Lucas fed them before the storm. Bed. He wanted to argue, but standing took all his concentration. The stairs might as well have been Everest. Lillian supported him, her slight frame surprisingly strong. "You saved him," she whispered as she helped him into bed. "You could have died. Couldn't let him freeze." Words came hard through the coughing. "Boy needs his chance." She brought willow bark tea, extra quilts, a basin of cool water. Through the fever's haze, he felt her hands gentle on his burning forehead, firm as she rubbed salve into his chest. He drifted in and out, lost in memory and dream. Sometimes he was back in the storm, but it was Emma he carried, not Thomas, his little girl laughing as snow dusted her dark curls. "Higher, Papa, throw me higher." But when he reached for her, she dissolved like mist. Sometimes it was Sarah scolding him. "Jedediah McGraw, you stubborn fool. God gave you sense. Use it." Her voice fond despite the words. She'd always said he'd work himself to death one day. But mostly, it was Lillian's voice anchoring him, reading from one of his books, coaxing broth between his cracked lips, singing soft songs he didn't recognize, lullabies maybe, or hymns from a childhood he'd never asked about. Thomas crept in sometimes, owl-eyed with worry. "I'm sorry, Mr. Jed, it's my fault you're sick." "No fault in surviving. Son," the words scraped his throat. "You did everything right." On the third night, the fever broke. Jed woke clear-headed but weak as a newborn colt, sheets soaked with sweat. Lillian dozed in the chair beside his bed, one hand resting on his arm as if to assure herself he still breathed. He studied her in the lamplight, purple shadows under her eyes, hair escaping its usual tight pins, dress rumpled from days of nursing. She'd fought for him as fiercely as any warrior, using weapons of cool cloths and patient spoonfuls and stubborn refusal to let him slip away. She stirred, catching him watching. "You're awake, really awake." "Thanks to you." "Thanks to your own stubbornness." But her voice shook. "I thought when you collapsed..." "Takes more than a storm to kill a McGraw." He tried for lightness, but the words came out serious. "Though I'd appreciate if Thomas could avoid any more adventures for a while." "He's been beside himself. Barely left your door except when I forced him to eat." She smoothed the quilt unnecessarily. "He made you something. Shall I fetch him?" The boy appeared minutes later, clutching a piece of wood. As he came closer, Jed saw it was clumsily carved into the rough shape of a horse. "Lucas helped a little," Thomas admitted, "but I did most of it. It's for you, for saving me." Jed took the little horse, turned it in his hands. Rough work, but made with care and intention. "It's fine work, Thomas, real fine." "You're really going to be okay?" The boy's voice was small. "I am. And Thomas..." Jed waited until the boy met his eyes. "What you did in that storm seeking shelter, barring the door, that was smart thinking. You've got good instincts." The boy's face lit up like sunrise. "Lucas says you're going to teach me to read weather signs when you're better." Says you can smell snow coming 2 days off. Lucas exaggerates. Day and a half at most. That won a giggle from Thomas, worth more than gold. Now get on to bed. Lessons start when I'm back on my feet. After Thomas left, Lillian fussed with straightening the room. Jed recognized the nervous energy. She had something to say but was working up to it. Spit it out, he said gently. She stilled, then sank back into the chair. When you were fevering, you talked. Ah, what did I say? You called for Emma, for Sarah. Her eyes were soft with understanding. You tried to save them too. Couldn't, though. Fever took them too fast. Nothing to fight except God's will. The old grief was there but muted, like looking at a scar instead of an open wound. Saving Thomas. Maybe it doesn't balance the scales, but it helps. You're a good man. Jed McGrath. The words came fierce, like she was arguing with someone who wasn't there. Whatever the town says, whatever they think about us, you're the best man I know. Lillian? No, let me say this. She leaned forward, urgent. These past days, I've had time to think about chances, about choosing, about what matters. Deep breath. I want this to be real, this marriage, not just papers and convenience, but real, if you're willing. The storm had passed, leaving the world crystal bright and new. Inside, something similar had happened. The fever had burned away more than sickness. It had cleared the careful distances they'd maintained, the polite barriers between mail-order strangers playing at family. I'm willing, he said simply. More than willing. She smiled then, shy but genuine. Good, because I already told Reverend McCoy we'd need him to say the words proper like once you're well. Seemed presumptuous to be nursing a man I wasn't truly wed to. Practical woman. I have my moments. She rose, pressed a quick kiss to his forehead. Sleep now. Real sleep, not fever dreams. Your family needs you strong. Your family. The words followed him into peaceful darkness. Outside. Snow continued to fall, but gentle now, a blanket rather than a burial shroud. The ranch was secure. The boy was safe. The woman who'd fought death for him was choosing to stay. Sometimes storms brought destruction. Sometimes they cleared the air for something new to grow. Spring felt possible, even in the depths of winter. Spring came to the valley like a hesitant bride, melting snow, revealing the earth's secrets, one patch at a time. The ranch stirred to life, calves dropping in the near pasture, chickens venturing beyond their coop, the kitchen garden showing brave green shoots. Lillian had claimed the wooden bathing room as her weekly refuge. Here, with water heated on the stove and privacy assured, she could drop the armor of high collars and long sleeves. The scars needed air and care, especially as the weather warmed. She'd just finished washing her hair, the long brown strands heavy with water, when she heard Jed's voice in the kitchen. Just need to grab the ledger, he called. Left it by the stove. It's on the shelf, she answered, reaching for her drying cloth. But as she turned, her wet hair caught on a rough board, yanking her off balance. She grabbed for the chair, missed, and knocked over the water pitcher with a crash. Lillian, you all right? Fine, just... But he was already at the door, concern overriding propriety. Are you hurt, I heard? He stopped mid-sentence. The afternoon light slanted through the small window, painting golden bars across the room. Lillian stood frozen, one hand clutching the drying cloth to her chest, the other still reaching for balance. But the cloth was small, meant for hair, not concealment. The scars on her shoulder and upper chest lay bare in the honeyed light, pink and puckered, mapping old pain across her skin. She waited for him to look away, to stammer apologies and retreat. Instead, Jed stepped into the room and gently took the larger blanket from its hook, his movements slow and deliberate, giving her time to refuse. When she didn't move, couldn't move, He draped it around her shoulders himself, his calloused fingers barely brushing her skin. "Your hair's dripping," he said softly. "You'll catch cold." She laughed, or maybe sobbed, the sound caught between.
"That's what worries you, not these."
She gestured helplessly at the scars visible above the blanket's edge. Jed's green eyes held hers steady.
"Why would they worry me?" "Because they're ugly. Because they mark me as damaged, used, broken."
The words clogged her throat. "As what, a survivor?" His voice carried an edge now. Not angry, but fierce. "You think I care about marks? Lillian. Everyone cares. Everyone stares. They see the scars and they know nothing." He moved closer, still careful not to crowd her.
"You want to know what I see?"
She couldn't speak, could only nod. "I see strength that survived what would have killed most. I see a woman who walked through fire literally, from what you've told me, and came out the other side still standing, still able to love that boy, still brave enough to travel across the country to a stranger." His hand rose slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face. "You hid your scars from the past. Lillian Hart, but me rough cowboy that I am, I only see your beauty." The words hung between them like a prayer. Lillian felt something crack inside her chest, some last wall she'd built brick by brick through years of pain.
"Jed."
"You're beautiful," he repeated, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Not despite the scars, not ignoring them. Beautiful, complete, as you are." She kissed him then, rising on her toes to bridge the height between them. Not the quick, shy pecks they'd exchanged since deciding to make the marriage real, but something deeper, a claiming, a choice. His arms came around her carefully, mindful of the blanket, holding her like something precious but not fragile. When they parted, both breathing unsteadily, she found her voice. "The fire. Josiah was passed out drunk. His friends were entertaining themselves at my expense. One of them knocked over a lamp." The words came easier than expected, like pus draining from a wound. "I grabbed Thomas and ran. A beam fell as we escaped. That's what caused these."
"And Josiah?"
"Couldn't wake him in time. Wouldn't, if I'm honest. The house came down on him and the others." She waited for judgment, for horror at her confession. Instead, Jed nodded once. "Good.
Good. Man raises his hand to a woman, lets his friends torment her, he forfeits any claim to mercy. You saved yourself and Thomas. That's all that matters."
The law called it an accident. The law's right. Accidents happen to men who play with fire. His expression was stone. "Anyone says different. They answer to me." She leaned into his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart through his shirt. "How did I find you? Jed McGraw, out of all the advertisements I could have answered." Wasn't chance. His chin rested on her wet hair. "Sarah used to say God works in mysterious ways. Took me a long time to believe her again after she died. But then you stepped off that train with Thomas, and I thought maybe she was right." They stood that way until the light shifted, the sacred made ordinary again. Finally, Jed stepped back. "And I'll let you finish," he said. "But Lillian, no more hiding. Not from me. Not in our home." "Our home," she nodded, throat tight. He paused at the door. "And if it matters, Sarah had a birthmark on her back, size of my hand, purple as spring crocuses. She hated it. Always wore high-backed dresses. Took her 2 years to let me see it." His smile was sad and sweet. "I kissed every inch of it the first time she showed me. Told her it was my favorite part because it was the part she'd chosen to share." He left then, closing the door gently behind him. Lillian sank onto the chair, overwhelmed. She'd expected disgust, rejection, maybe bitter acceptance at best. Instead, she'd received something she hadn't dared hope for, understanding born from parallel grief. Later, she found him in the barn, mending harnesses,
Thomas was with him, practicing knots under his patient instruction. "Mama," Thomas bounced over. "Jed says I can help with the branding next month. Says I'm old enough to work the tallies."
"If your mother agrees," Jed amended. Glancing up, his eyes were warm, holding memory of their earlier intimacy. "I trust your judgment," she said, meaning more than just the branding. That evening, as they prepared for bed in the room they now truly shared, Lillian made a decision. Instead of her usual high-necked nightgown, she chose one that left her arms bare. The scars showed clearly in the lamplight. Jed's eyes tracked them, not with revision, but with something like reverence. "Thank you," he said simply.
"For what?"
"Trusting me with all of you." She moved into his arms, finally understanding that love wasn't the absence of wounds, but the presence of someone who saw them and stayed anyway. That night, she hung her high-collared dress in the back of the wardrobe. She'd wear it to town, perhaps where judgment still waited, but here, in this house that had become home, she could finally breathe free. Outside, coyotes sang to the rising moon, their voices wild and unashamed. The sound no longer frightened her. Like her scars, they were simply part of the landscape, proof of survival in a hard land that demanded truth over pretense. "Tell me about Sarah," she said into the darkness.
"Tell me about Emma."
And he did, voice soft with memory. She gave him her own stories in return, not just the pain, but the girl she'd been before, the dreams she'd carried. They talked until dawn painted the mountains pink, weaving their separate griefs into something shared, something that could bear the weight of the future. When Thomas padded in at sunrise, rubbing sleepy eyes, he found them still awake, still talking. "Are you having a party without me?" "The best kind," Jed said, lifting the boy onto the bed between them. "The kind where everyone's invited." Lillian pulled her son close, no longer worried about the scars he might glimpse. This was what healing looked like, not the erasure of wounds, but the courage to let love see them clearly. "Story," Thomas requested, settling against Jed's shoulder with the trust of a child who'd found his place. "What kind of story?" Jed asked. "About brave people and horses, and maybe some bad men who get what's coming." Lillian met Jed's eyes over their son's head, their son truly now, and smiled. "I think we can manage that." The sun rose fully, flooding the room with light that made everything golden, even scars, especially scars. They caught the light and threw it back transformed, like medals of honor worn by those who'd survived the wars nobody talked about. "Beautiful," Jed had said, not despite, but complete. For the first time in her life, Lillian Hart McGraw believed it might be true. The spring festival filled Silver Vale's churchyard with the scent of fresh bread and early wildflowers. Bunting stretched between trees, and children raced between the picnic tables, their Sunday clothes already dusty. It should have been perfect, a celebration of winter's end, of community and renewal. But Lillian felt the stares like pinpricks as she helped set out food. 3 months had passed since her arrival, long enough for speculation to ferment into conviction. The women's whispers followed her movements. "Notice how she never speaks of her people back east? And that boy calling McGraw Pa already? Unseemly haste, if you ask me. Mark my words, there's scandal there. A proper widow observes mourning." Lillian kept her smile fixed, arranging pies with steady hands. Let them talk. She had Jed, had Thomas blooming under his care, had a home where her scars could breathe. Their words were mosquito bites compared to what she'd survived. "Mrs. McGraw." Ruthie McCoy's voice cut through the chatter like a blade. "How good of you to help. Though I do wonder if you've observed proper mourning for your late husband. These festivals can be so cheerful for recent widows."
"My husband died over a year ago,"
Lillian replied evenly. "I've observed what was proper." "A year, Mrs." Garrett joined them, eyes bright with malice. "How strange, the way you never speak of him, One might think it was either yesterday or a lifetime ago.
Grief takes many forms,
Lillian said. Indeed. Ruthie's smile was sharp. As does shame. Tell me, what kind of accident was it that took your husband? Farm accidents can be so varied. Before Lillian could respond, a commotion erupted near the church steps. Thomas came running, shirt torn, dirt on his face. Behind him, Samuel, Garrett, and 2 other boys followed. Laughing? Bastard boy ran to his mama, Samuel called. "See, told you he ain't got no real PA." Thomas crashed into Lillian's legs, trying not to cry. Her heart broke and hardened in the same instant. Thomas Hart McGraw. Jed's voice carried across the churchyard like thunder. He strode through the crowd, people parting before him like wheat before wind. He stopped beside Thomas, one massive hand settling on the boy's shoulder. "That's his name," Jed continued, voice carrying to every corner of the yard. "Thomas Hart McGray, my son." His green eyes swept the crowd, landing on Samuel. "Any boy or man who says different is calling me a liar, and I don't take kindly to being called a liar." Samuel shrank back, his father suddenly very interested in his shoes. But Ruthie McCoy, buoyed by righteousness and an audience, stepped forward. "Mr. McGraw, while your attachment to the boy is admirable, facts remain facts. He is not your blood. This woman came to you with another man's child, and we have only her word about—" "Enough." The word cracked like a whip. Jed moved to the center of the gathering, bringing Thomas with him. Lillian started forward, but his look asked her to wait. "You want to talk about blood?" His voice filled the space. "Let me tell you about blood. My Emma had my blood, had Sarah's blood. Didn't stop the fever from taking her. Didn't make her any more mine than this boy who chooses to call me Pa." He looked down at Thomas, his harsh features softening. "Family isn't about blood, Mrs. McCoy. It's about choice, about showing up every day, about teaching a boy to ride and read and be a good man, about being there when nightmares come or when he needs to know he's worth something." His gaze returned to the crowd. Harder now. "This is my wife. This is my son. We are a family by choice, by law, and by the grace of God. Anyone who has issue with that can take it up with me directly. But I warn you, I'm not a patient man when it comes to protecting what's mine." The silence stretched taut. Then Lucas stepped out of the crowd, his weathered face set in determined lines. "Well said, boss." He looked at Thomas. "Boy's got McGraw grit already. Seen him working the horses. Natural talent." He glared at Samuel. "More'n I can say for some." Old Pete from the feed store nodded. "Boy helped me load wagons last week. Good worker. Polite, too." One by one, the men of the community voiced support, not for Lillian, perhaps, but for Jed. And in this world, that was enough. Ruthie's face had gone mottled. "Well, I never—" "No," Jed cut her off. "You never did. Never lost everything. Never had to rebuild from ashes. Never had to choose between pride and survival." His voice gentled, became almost pitying. "I pray you never have to, Mrs. McCoy. But until you do, maybe show some Christian charity to those who have—" Reverend McCoy finally found his voice. "Perhaps we should return to celebrating God's blessings of spring. Mrs. McGray, I believe you've made your famous chess pie." The transition was awkward but welcome. People dispersed, conversations resumed, though with a different tenor. Thomas stayed close to Jed, hero worship plain on his face. But the peace was short-lived. As the sun began its descent, painting the mountains gold, a rider appeared on the valley road, even from a distance. Something about him set Lillian's nerves screaming. The way he sat his horse loose, arrogant, the way his hat tilted at a mocking angle. "Jed," she breathed. He followed her gaze, body tensing. "Lucas," he said quietly, "get Thomas to the wagon." But it was too late. The rider had reached the churchyard. dismounting with a showy flourish. Caleb Roan looked exactly as Lillian remembered handsome in the way wolves were handsome, with cold eyes and a smile that never reached them. Well, well. His voice carried like oil on water. What a pretty picture. The Widow Hart playing house. The crowd, sensing drama, pressed closer. Ruthie McCoy looked like Christmas had come early. Roan, Sheriff Daniels stepped forward.
Thought you were in Canyon City.
Early release. Caleb's smile widened. Good behavior. Imagine that. His eyes never left Lillian. Came to pay my respects to an old friend. Heard she'd found herself a new situation. State your business and move on, the sheriff ordered, though he looked uneasy. Without active warrants, his hands were tied. My business, Caleb laughed. Just wanted to see for myself. The woman who killed my friend Josiah, living high with a rich rancher, just as sure is funny sometimes. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lillian felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. That's a lie, she said, voice steadier than her hands. Is it? Caleb's eyes glittered. House fire. Wasn't it poor Josiah passed out? Couldn't wake him in time. Convenient. Him being drunk. Even more convenient. You inheriting his insurance money. There was no insurance money. The fire was an accident. Accident. Caleb savored the word. Sure. Just like it was an accident that beam fell right across the bedroom door. Just like it was an accident you had bags packed by the door. You were there, Lillian said suddenly, pieces clicking together. You started it. You knocked over the lamp when you were... She stopped, aware of Thomas listening. When I was what? Caleb's voice went silk soft. Careful, Mrs. Hart. Slander's a serious charge. Sides, I was in jail that night. Records prove it. Bar fight across town. His smile was predatory. Couldn't have been there. Just heard about it after. How you walked away without a scratch while 4 men died. That's not true. I was burned. She stopped, realizing the trap. Admitting to scars meant revealing them. Here, before everyone... Burned where? Ruthie McCoy pounced. We've never seen any burns. The crowd pressed closer, hungry for scandal. Lillian felt like a rabbit ringed by foxes. Then Jed was there, solid as a mountain between her and Caleb. Man's got a funny definition of respect, riding into a church gathering to harass women and children. McGraw. Caleb's tone suggested they were equals, which made Jed's jaw tighten. No harassment intended. Just thought folks should know what kind of woman you've taken in. The kind who... What happened next was so fast, few could later agree on details. Caleb's hand moved toward his hip, reaching for tobacco. He'd claim later, though his hand shape suggested otherwise. Jed moved faster, his fist connecting with Caleb's jaw with a crack that echoed off the church walls. Caleb hit the dirt hard, hat rolling away. He came up spitting blood and curses. You'll pay for that. McGraw, you and your murdering... Choose your next words real careful. Jed's voice was death quiet. Real careful. Caleb wiped blood from his mouth, eyes calculating. He was outnumbered, on uncertain ground, but his message had been delivered, seeds of doubt planted in fertile soil. I'll be around, he said finally, retrieving his hat. Got business in the area, mining interests. He mounted his horse, touched his split lip. We'll settle accounts later. He rode out slowly, insolently, leaving silence in his wake. Sheriff Daniels cleared his throat. Well, that was unfortunate. McGray, I'll need to... Later, Jed said curtly. He turned to face the crowd, Thomas's hand in his. Lillian sheltered by his bulk. Show's over, folks. We're going home. They walked to their wagon through a gauntlet of stares and whispers. Lillian kept her head high, though she felt naked, exposed, every secret laid bare for judgment. In the wagon, Thomas finally spoke. Ma, who was that man? A liar. Jed answered before she could.
A man who wants to hurt people because he's hurt inside. We don't listen to liars. Son, Buddy said, Ma. He said a lot of things. Doesn't make them true. Jed's voice was firm but gentle. Your ma's the bravest woman I know. Whatever happened before, she saved you. That's all that matters.
But as they rode home through gathering dusk, Lillian saw smoke rising in the distance, black smoke from the direction of their ranch. Her blood turned to ice. Jed!
I see it.
His face was granite, but his hand found hers, squeezed hard.
Hold on.
He urged the horses faster, and the smell of smoke grew stronger. By the time they crested the ridge above the ranch, they could see the source, the barn, engulfed in flames, horses screaming in terror. Lucas had saved what he could, most of the horses freed before the flames took hold. The tack shed spared by wind direction, but the barn was gone, reduced to smoldering beams and ash. In the morning light, the devastation looked worse, like a black wound on the land.
Found these.
Sheriff Daniels held up 3 coal oil cans, empty and reeking. And horse tracks leading to Red Rock Canyon. Roan's got at least 2 men with him, maybe more. Jed studied the tracks with the focus of a man reading scripture. They want us to follow. It's a trap. Likely so, the sheriff agreed. But we can't let them burn out every ranch in the valley. I'm forming a posse. You and... Lillian watched from the porch as men gathered Lucas. Of course, loyal as sunrise. Pete from the feed store. The Garrett men, setting aside their wives' prejudices. Even young Deputy Cole, eager to prove himself. Hard times revealed true character, and Silver Vale's men were showing theirs.
I'm coming too,
she said. No. Jed's response was immediate.
You're staying here with Thomas. He's after me. Jed, this is my fight.
Which is why you're staying. He gripped her shoulders, gentle but firm. He wants you to follow. Wants you off safe ground. I won't give him that. She wanted to argue, but Thomas stood behind her, trying to look brave but failing. She couldn't leave him, not when terror lived in his eyes. Promise me you'll be careful, she whispered.
Promise.
He kissed her forehead, then knelt before Thomas. You're the man of the house while I'm gone. Can you handle that? Thomas nodded solemnly.
Yes, Pa.
The words still hit Jed like a gift. He ruffled the boy's hair. Good man. Keep the rifle by the door. You remember what I taught you? Yes, sir. Both eyes open. Breathe out slow. Squeeze, don't pull. That's my boy. The posse rode out as the sun climbed. 12 men armed with righteousness and Winchester rifles. Lillian watched until they disappeared into the canyon's mouth, then set about fortifying the house. She'd survived one fire. She wouldn't be caught helpless by another. The trail into Red Rock Canyon narrowed quickly, walls rising on either side like a closing fist. Jed rode near the front, every sense alert. The morning sounds were wrong. No birds, no small animals. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Don't like this, Lucas muttered. Feels like... The first shot cracked the air, echoing between stone walls. Pete's horse screamed and went down, the man rolling clear with a curse. More shots followed, spurts of dust showing where bullets struck. Cover! Sheriff Daniels roared. Men scattered, finding what shelter they could behind rocks and scrub. Jed counted muzzle flashes, 3 shooters, maybe 4, positioned on the ridges above. McGrath, Caleb's voice carried down like poisoned honey. Brought friends to our party. How thoughtful. Let's end this. Roan, the sheriff called. Surrender now. Might go easier on you. Laughter echoed. Surrender for what? Defending myself against a man who attacked me unprovoked. You saw it yourself. Sheriff. McGrath threw the first punch. More shots, keeping them pinned. Jed studied the canyon walls. Mind working. They're a deer trail, barely visible. Switchbacking up the eastern wall. Dangerous, exposed, but possible. He caught Lucas's eye, gestured. His foreman nodded understanding.
Keep them talking, Jed whispered to the sheriff, then began working his way east, using every scrap of cover.
What do you want? Roan? Sheriff Daniels played along. Justice. That woman killed 4 men, including my best friend. Walked away rich while they burned. You call that right? Judge called it accidental. Case closed.
Judge never heard the whole story, like how she'd been meeting with a lawyer about divorce, like how she'd been asking about insurance policies, like how convenient it was. Josiah dying just when she needed freedom.
Jed climbed steadily, fingers finding holds in the weathered stone. Below, the sheriff kept Caleb talking, buying time. Sweat stung Jed's eyes despite the cool air. One slip meant a fall that would break more than bones. Even if that was true, the sheriff called. Burning barns ain't justice, it's crime. Crime. Caleb's voice turned ugly. Let me tell you about crime. Woman plays sweet, gets a man to marry her, then decides she wants out. But divorce is messy, expensive, so much easier if he just dies. Jed reached a ledge, paused to catch his breath. He could see them now, 4 men spread along the ridge, focused on the trapped posse below. Caleb stood bold as brass, gesturing with his rifle like a preacher with a Bible.
She's got you all fooled, Caleb continued. That innocent act, those big eyes, but I knew Josiah Hart, knew him from the war. He saved my life at Antietam, took a bullet meant for me. And she killed him, sure as if she'd pulled a trigger.
War friend. That explained the loyalty. The vengeance. Men bonded in battle stayed bonded, right or wrong.
Jed worked closer, quiet as smoke, 20 yards, 15. His position gave him clear shots at 2 of the men, maybe 3 if he moved fast.
But Caleb stood partially shielded by an outcrop. Then Thomas's young voice pierced his concentration, not here, but memory.
Pa, why do people hurt each other?
Because they're hurting inside. Son, pain makes people do terrible things. The memory decided him. These men were wrong, dangerous, but they were also human, wounded animals lashing out. Roan, he called, rifle steady on the nearest gunman. Drop the weapons, now!
4 heads swiveled. For a heartbeat, nobody moved.
Then chaos. The nearest man spun, raising his rifle. Jed fired, catching him in the shoulder, spinning him down. Lucas appeared on the opposite ridge he'd climbed too, flanking from the west. His shot took another gunman in the leg. Caleb dove for cover, firing wild. Kill them all! But the odds had shifted. The posse below found targets, no longer pinned. Deputy Cole proved his worth, putting a bullet through another attacker's gun hand. In moments, it was over 3 men down and groaning, weapons scattered. Only Caleb remained free, pressed behind his outcrop.
You think you've won. McGrath, you think this ends it?
It ends when you say it ends. Jed called back. Your choice. Come out fighting and die. Or come out empty-handed and live. Live for what prison rope? Caleb laughed bitterly. You took everything from me. That woman took everything. Josiah was all the family I had left. Then honor him better than this. Jed said, would he want you killing innocent people, burning barns, terrorizing children? Silence stretched. Then, she's not innocent. Maybe not. Maybe none of us are. But that's for God to judge, not you. Jed eased closer, voice steady. I know about losing people. Caleb. Know about the anger that follows. How it eats you up inside until revenge seems like the only medicine. But it's not. It's just more poison. Easy words from a man who has what he wants. I buried my wife and daughter 3 years back. Fever took them in 2 days. You want to talk about unfair? Jed's voice roughened. But I didn't burn down the world. I survived. Found new reasons to keep going. By stealing another man's family. By choosing to build instead of destroy. By taking in people who needed what I could give. He could see Caleb now, part of his profile visible. Josiah's gone. Nothing changes that, but his son lives. You want to honor your friend, stop trying to orphan his boy. That hit home. Caleb's shoulders sagged slightly. Drop the gun, Caleb. End this clean. For a long moment, only wind spoke. Then metal clattered on stone. Caleb Roan stepped out, hands empty, face aged 10 years and 10 minutes. Should have died at Antietam with him, he said quietly. Would have been cleaner. Sheriff Daniels climbed up to take him into custody. As they bound his hands, Caleb looked at Jed with hollow eyes.
Did she tell you how he died? Really died?
Burned in a fire he was too drunk to escape. That's the what. I'm asking if she told you why he was so drunk. Jed waited. She'd been putting something in his whiskey, making him sleep deeper. Found the bottle after, hidden in her sewing basket. Laudanum. Enough to keep a man down for hours. Caleb's smile was poison. Still think she's innocent. I think, Jed said slowly, that a woman protecting herself and her child from violent men doesn't need my judgment, or yours. They brought the prisoners down tied to their saddles. Pete needed help walking twisted ankle from his fall, but no one was seriously hurt. The ride back was quiet, each man alone with his thoughts. At the ranch, Lillian waited on the porch, rifle across her lap. The relief in her eyes when she saw Jed nearly broke his composure. Thomas burst from the house, running full tilt to throw his arms around Jed's waist. You got him. You're okay. We're all okay. Son, it's over. But as they led the prisoners away, Jed caught Lillian's arm. We need to talk. Tonight, after Thomas sleeps. She nodded, understanding that some reckonings couldn't be postponed. That night, with Thomas finally sleeping after demanding the story 3 times, they sat by the dying fire. Jed told her what Caleb had said about the laudanum. Lillian stared into the flames for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was steady as stone. Yes, I drugged him, the nights he drank with them. I put laudanum in his whiskey, just enough to keep him down when things got bad. She met his eyes without flinching. I told myself it was protection, that if he was deeper asleep, he wouldn't wake up and join in, or worse, watch and laugh. The night of the fire, I used more, maybe too much. I was desperate. They'd been talking about sharing more permanently, about how Josiah owed them for some gambling debt. Her hands clenched. When the lamp fell, when the fire started, I tried to wake him. For Thomas's sake, I tried, but he was too far gone. And if he'd woken, if you could have saved him... She considered this with terrible honesty. I don't know. Part of me wanted to let it burn. Part of me was already running. But I tried, Jed. For whatever that's worth, I tried. It's worth everything, he said simply. You don't think I'm a murderer? I think you're a survivor who made an impossible choice in an impossible situation. He took her scarred hands in his. And I think any man who drives his wife to such measures forfeits any claim to mercy. She broke then, sobbing for the girl who'd made such desperate choices, for the woman who'd carried the weight alone. Jed held her through it, solid and unchanging as the mountains. Later, as dawn touched the sky, she asked, what happens now? Will they reopen the case? Caleb's word against yours. No proof but the ramblings of a man who burned our barn. Sheriff Daniels is a practical man. He'll see no purpose in pursuing ghosts. He pulled her closer. It's done, Lillian. The past is done. We look forward now. Can we really? We rebuilt after the fire. We'll rebuild the barn. Thomas is learning and growing. The ranch is prospering. He kissed her temple. We're a family. Remember chosen and choosing every day. That's what matters. Outside, roosters announced the new day. There was work to do, always work on a ranch. But first, this moment of peace, of acceptance, of love that saw clearly and stayed anyway. The mountain stood witness, ancient and patient,
In their shadow, broken people built something whole, something worth defending. It wasn't pretty or perfect, but it was theirs. And that was enough. Summer painted the valley gold, wheat swaying like ocean waves in the warm breeze. The new barn stood proud where the old had burned, raised by neighbors who'd set aside gossip to help rebuild. Even the Garretts had come, Mrs. Garrett silent but present, handling sandwiches while men handled timber. Today was special. Lillian adjusted her best dress, new made with a proper neckline, but nothing to hide. The scars showed faintly in the morning light, badges of survival she no longer concealed at home. Thomas fidgeted beside her in his Sunday clothes, hair slicked down despite his protests. "Stand still," she murmured, straightening his collar. "You want to look proper when I officially become a McGrag." Thomas bounced on his toes. "Do you think everyone will come, even the Garretts?" "We invited the whole town," Jed said from the doorway, magnificent in his black suit. "Whether they come is their choice, but the people who matter will be here." The ceremony would be simple, a renewal of vows for Jed and Lillian, and formal adoption papers for Thomas. Reverend McCoy had agreed to perform both, his gentle soul overruling his wife's objections. "Besides," Jed added with a wink, "Lucas threatened to boycott the feed store if folks didn't show. Amazing how cooperative people get when their grain supply's at stake." They'd set up in the yard, under the cottonwoods Sarah had planted years ago. Chairs borrowed from the church, tables laden with food, wildflowers in mason jars. Simple, honest, real like the life they'd built. Guests began arriving mid-morning. Lucas first, of course, wearing a suit that had seen better decades but pressed with care. Sheriff Daniels and his wife. Deputy Cole looking shy in civilian clothes. The doctor who'd tended Jed's fever. The banker who'd approved the loan for rebuilding. And surprisingly, steadily, others came. The Holbrooks. Curiosity overcoming prejudice. Pete from the feed store with his whole clan. Families from neighboring ranches. Children racing between the adults' legs. Even Ruthie McCoy appeared, lips pursed but present, standing slightly apart like she wasn't sure she belonged. "That's near everyone," Thomas whispered, awed. "They really came." "Communities like that," Jed told him. "Takes time to trust, but once they do, they show up when it matters." Reverend McCoy took his place under the largest cottonwood, Bible in hand. The crowd quieted, forming a loose circle. Lillian's heart hammered as Jed took her hand, Thomas standing between them. "Dearly beloved." The Reverend began. "We gather today for two sacred purposes. First, to bless the union of Jedediah and Lillian, already joined in law, but seeking God's blessing anew. Second, to witness the formal adoption of Thomas Hart as Thomas Hart McGraw, son-in-law as he's already son-in-love." A murmur ran through the crowd, approval mostly, though Lillian caught some skeptical glances. Let them look. She'd earned this moment in fire and fear and choosing to stay. "Marriage," Reverend McCoy continued, "is not entered into lightly. These two have already proven their commitment through trial and hardship. They've chosen each other not in the first flush of romance, but in the clear light of knowing. That's a rare and precious thing." He turned to them. "Jedediah, will you continue to have this woman as your wife? Will you love her, comfort her, honor and keep her, in sickness and health, in prosperity and adversity?" "I will," Jed's voice carried across the yard. "Sure as sunrise. Every day. I will." "Lillian, will you continue to have this man as your husband? Will you love him, comfort him, honor and keep him through all that life may bring?" "I will." Her voice broke slightly, but her eyes were clear. "For all my days, I will." "And now, young Thomas," the Reverend smiled down at the boy, "do you wish to be adopted by Jedediah McGraw? To take his name and be his son in all ways?" "Yes, sir," Thomas nearly shouted. I mean, yes, Reverend, very much. Chuckles rippled through the crowd. And Jedediah, do you wish to adopt this boy? To be his father-in-law, indeed? To guide and protect him as your own? I do. Jed's hand settled on Thomas's shoulder. He's already my son. This just makes it official. Then, by the power vested in me by God and the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce this family whole and holy. What God has joined, let no man put asunder. Applause broke out, genuine and warm. Thomas whooped. Throwing his arms around both parents, neighbors pressed forward with congratulations. And, for once, the words seemed honest. During the meal that followed, Lillian noticed Ruthie McCoy standing alone, plate untouched. Something maybe compassion, maybe just weariness with old battles made her approach. Mrs. McCoy, thank you for coming. Ruthie's spine stiffened. Reverend insisted, Christian duty. Still, it means something. Lillian hesitated, then plunged ahead. I know you disapprove. Of me, of how this happened, but we're neighbors. Our children will grow up together. Perhaps we could what be friends? Ruthie's laugh was bitter. You have no idea what it's like. Do you being the one who maintains standards, who holds the line against moral decay, someone has to... Why? Lillian asked gently. Why does it have to be you? Ruthie blinked, caught off guard. We're all just trying to survive out here. Lillian continued. To build something good in a hard land, maybe the lines aren't as clear as we'd like. Maybe grace matters more than judgment. For a moment, Ruthie's mask slipped, revealing something tired and lonely beneath. Then it snapped back into place. Pretty words don't change facts, she said stiffly. But when she walked away, her steps seemed less certain. As afternoon wore toward evening, Jed called for attention. He stood on the porch steps, Thomas beside him, Lillian close by. Want to thank you all for coming, he said, for witnessing this day, for helping rebuild after the fire, for being the kind of community that shows up. He paused, gathering words. 3 years ago, I thought my life was over, thought I'd lost everything worth having, but life has a way of surprising you, of bringing gifts you never expected, wrapped in packages you might not recognize at first. His eyes found Lillian. This woman saved me, not from drowning or gunfire, but from something worse, giving up. She and Thomas brought life back to this ranch, this house, this stubborn heart. Lillian felt tears slip free, not caring who saw. So, here's to second chances. Jed raised his glass of cider. To families made by choice, to neighbors who become friends, to building something better from the ashes of what was. Here, here, Lucas called, and glasses raised across the yard, as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Lillian found herself on the porch with Thomas asleep against her shoulder, worn out from excitement. Jed sat beside them, solid and warm. No regrets, he asked quietly. She thought of the long road that had brought her here, the fear, the pain, the desperate choices. Then she looked at what surrounded her now, a home, a husband who saw her truly, a son growing strong and confident, a community slowly warming to accept them. None, she said firmly. Not one. Good. He pulled her closer. Because I plan on keeping you both for a good long while. Forever, Thomas mumbled sleepily, proving he wasn't quite unconscious. That's how long families last. That's right, son. Jed agreed. Forever and then some. The stars emerged one by one, diamonds on velvet. In the barn, the new barn. Built by community hands, horses settled for the night. From the kitchen came Lucas's off-key humming as he helped with dishes, refusing to let the family work on their wedding day. Lillian remembered the woman who'd stepped off the train in a blizzard, terrified and desperate. hiding scars under high collars and higher walls. That woman felt like a stranger now, or maybe an old friend who'd finally found her way home. "What are you thinking?" Jed asked. "About fire," she said slowly. "How it destroys, but also clears the ground for new growth. How the strongest trees are the ones that survive the burning. Speaking of fire." He reached into his pocket, pulled out something small. "Found this when we were cleaning up after the barn fire. Thought you might want it." It was her old wedding ring, the one from Josiah, warped by heat but intact. She'd thrown it in the barn the day after they'd caught Caleb, a gesture of letting go that had felt necessary. "Why would I want this?" "Not to wear, but maybe to keep. Reminder of how far you've come, how strong you are." He closed her fingers around it. "Or throw it in the creek. Your choice. Just thought. Sometimes we need to hold our past before we can truly release it." She studied the twisted metal, then stood. "Thomas, wake up. Want to see something?" The boy stirred, blinking owlishly. "What?" "Come on." She led them to the rise behind the house where Sarah and Emma lay beneath simple stones. The cemetery was peaceful in the starlight, speaking of rest rather than sorrow. Lillian knelt by a bare patch of earth. "This seems right." She dug a small hole with her hands, placed the ruined ring inside. "For the girl who wore this, may she rest now." Thomas, understanding with the wisdom children sometimes showed, added a handful of wildflowers. Jed covered the hole, patting the earth firm. "There," Lillian said, dusting her hands. All the ghosts lay to rest. They walked back to the house hand in hand in hand. A family complete, not despite their scars, but because of them. Behind them, the mountains stood eternal guard. Before them, the lit windows of home beckoned. In the kitchen, the half-burned silk scarf still hung on its nail, not hidden, not shameful, just part of the landscape. Beside it, Jed had hung Thomas's carved horse, and Lillian had added a sketch the boy made of all three of them. "Story time," Thomas asked hopefully, fighting yawns. "Short one," Lillian agreed. "Then bed. Tomorrow's a work day. Wedding or no wedding." They settled by the fire, Thomas between them, safe in the circle of their arms. Outside, night sounds started up, coyotes calling, owls hunting, the eternal conversation of the wild. But inside was warmth and light and love. A rough cowboy who saw beauty where others saw damage, a woman who'd walked through fire and emerged stronger, a boy who'd found his place and his name. "Once upon a time," Jed began, his voice rumbling like distant thunder, "there was a family who chose each other." The fire crackled, the clock ticked, and in a house that had known loss and found love, the story continued, not ended, but ever beginning, like hope itself, like grace, like the promise of all the summers yet to come. Storms would return, they always did, but in that house, that family, they had learned the secret how to kindle warmth not just for heating, but for calling each other home, by name, by choice, by love that saw clearly and stayed anyway. Forever, as Thomas said, and then some. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope it touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it with you. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please leave a comment below, and let's connect over our shared love of these Wild West tales. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Night, hit that like button, and don't forget to press the hype button to help more people discover these frontier stories of love, courage, and redemption. Your support means the world to me. Until next time, partners.